Hi everybody, once again this is Ed. Welcome back to Introduction to Sociology, and in this video we're going to be talking about deviance and criminal behavior. I thought I should just go ahead and mention about deviance that deviance is not necessarily anything that is criminal, nor is it anything that is inherently bad, nor is it anything that is harmful or dangerous. Rather, deviance is the violation of the norms of society. And you guys are aware from a previous video that norms refer to the unwritten rules of a society. That's exactly what deviance is. And I got my little illustration here to help me out. The Despicable Me and the set of Minion. And the fact of the matter is, I also have a short little video here for you guys to watch. It's dealing with deviant behavior. More appropriately, it's dealing with the perception of the behavior that is deviant and why certain behaviors are considered deviant and certain behaviors are not. In this short little video, you will notice that the man is singing about the evils of drug use, all the while smoking a cigarette. Coincidentally, I should mention, the man later died of lung cancer, along with 450,000 people who die every year from smoking. However, certain drugs, such as cannabis, are struggling to become legal in all states, as well as at the federal level. Cannabis, to my knowledge, has killed no one. No one has overdosed from cannabis. I should mention, in all fairness, however, that cannabis is harmful, particularly for chronic users, but no one has actually died from a cannabis overdose. Unlike alcohol and tobacco and prescription drugs, which are conveniently perfectly legal, we'll answer the question of why in a minute. But before we do, I'd like you to pause this video after you answer this question: are you a deviant? And are you a criminal, for that matter? So go ahead and pause the video after you ask this question and think about it, kick it around in your head for a little while. So the question of whether or not you are deviant: yes, you are deviant. So am I. Everybody engages in deviant behavior at some point in their lives. Primary deviance is the act of doing something that is deviant, and we all do at some stage or another. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are bad people. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are criminals, although if you go 1 mile over the speed limit, you technically, have committed a crime, and therefore you are a criminal by definition. Now, does that mean that you adopt the deviant or criminal identity? Probably not. Many of us don't. So that's the distinction between primary and secondary deviance. Primary deviance is the deviant act itself. Secondary deviance is the adaptation of a deviant or a criminal identity. And it goes even further from there, even sliding down even further to tertiary deviance. Individuals who engage in tertiary deviance actually will defend their deviant behavior as normal. They seem to like the way they are. They not only have that deviant identity, but they seem to like it, and they're going to defend it. And by golly, they don't want to change. So, primary, secondary, and tertiary deviance. You need to know that. It will be on your exam, as will labels, stigmas, and self-fulfilling prophecies. A label is simply a way to distinguish people. We do that all the time. Everybody is labeled and everybody labels others. We do it. Labels in and of themselves are not necessarily harmful. However, when labels become so powerful that they change the identity of the person, they become stigmas. And I'll tell you, I don't know of a situation, I don't think I've ever heard of a situation where stigmas are a good thing. I've always heard them in the negative context. And the fact of the matter is that getting to that stigma, particularly if we are talking about things such as a criminal record, or being an addict or an alcoholic. We see a lot of harm that comes about through stigmatizing people. They are denied opportunities in society that they otherwise should be given. For example, if you have a criminal record in this country, you may be denied the right to vote. You may be denied the right to find a job. You may be denied the right to find a place to live. And depending on the certain circumstances of your criminal conviction, you may be denied the right financial aid to go to school. So be aware that while labels in and of themselves are not inherently bad, stigmas are. And I don't use the word bad lightly. I'm very reluctant to use the words good or bad in this course, but stigmas are definitely bad, and we want to get away from them. Because stigmas will ultimately cause someone to have a self-fulfilling prophecy. As that person's identity becomes changed, he is going to act in ways that are going to cause that identity to become true. For example, if you have been told all your life that you are no good, that you are worthless, you are going to, in some instances, in many instances, not everybody, but you are going to engage in behaviors that are going to cause that to come to fruition and to bring about a lot of pain and misery on yourselves. So please do not do that. I recommend not doing that because I tend to believe that everybody is worth something, and I tend to believe that we should try to rise above our labels and rise above our stigmas. So if we're looking at the perspectives of deviance, we need to look at the micro level symbolic interaction, as well as the macro level of conflict and structural functionalism. I'm going to start with symbolic interaction first, because many of these perspectives of symbolic interaction refer to criminology. I take these from criminology. And I'll mention that symbolic interaction refers to not the act of deviance, but it is the societal reaction that makes the behavior deviant. There are behaviors that are acceptable in one society, and behaviors that are those same behaviors are not acceptable. Those same behaviors are deviant in other societies, or even in the same society in different circumstances. There's absolutely nothing wrong with wearing a shirt to teach a class. Wearing a shirt, khakis, dress shoes, dark socks, and a tie to teach a class is perfectly acceptable. You probably wouldn't want to wear that to the beach or to work out. That would be considered deviant. It's perfectly acceptable to sit there and enunciate and speak loudly when you are talking to a classroom full of students. You probably would not do that in the library, because that would be considered deviant behavior. I also want to mention these differential association. The fact of the matter is, differential association is a criminological theory, and it states, it has nine tenets, or nine statements that support it. And it says that essentially we learn to be deviant, or law abiding for that matter, through small intimate peer groups. We learn not only the behaviors themselves, but the attitudes toward them. And that makes a lot of sense if you stop and think about it. Because if you see your intimate peer groups, such as your parents, your family, if you see them engaging in deviant behavior, you're probably going to grow up thinking, well, there's nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with it if mom and dad do it, right? So that is shaping you. That is how symbolic interaction shapes you, through differential association. Then there's the issue of social control. Social control refers to this internal mechanism that should be developed in you. Many people refer to it as a conscience, and it should be developed in you at a very young age. And as long as it's developed in you, and as long as you are willing to control your behavior, you should be fine. However, outer measures of social control also impact you. In fact, those outer measures of control are impacting the development of your inner control. And if that inner control, if that conscience is not developed in you, you will probably end up experiencing some of the outer control known as the criminal justice system. And that's not fun, let me just tell you. Last but not least is the labeling theory and the techniques of neutralization. The techniques of neutralization were developed by Matza and Sykes. They referred to essentially exactly what it says they are. They are ways that individuals who are engaging in deviant behavior are able to neutralize in their conscience their actions. They're able to, I wouldn't say justify, but they're able to put it in such a way that their own conscience can sleep at night. And I mean, we've all done that from time to time. We all have. I know we have. Some of these include denying responsibility. Denying responsibility means that we had no choice but to do what we did. Denying injury, meaning that we say that there is no actual harm that takes place. The denying injury, for me, goes almost hand in hand with denying responsibility. Denying responsibility for individuals who might steal food. They needed to steal the food or they would starve. Or denying the injury. If you steal from, say, Walmart, if you steal the groceries from Walmart, is it really hurting Walmart that you've taken a $1.59 can of soup? I mean, they've got billions of dollars. There's no real harm done. Individuals may also blame the victims. We see a lot of that in crime. When individuals are charged with a crime or they've done something wrong, they'll sit there and they'll go, "Well, this person made me do it, or society made me do it." You have individuals who will actually condemn the people who are condemning them. In other words, saying that these people that are accusing you of stealing have set up a system by which you have to steal to survive. And then there's people who will appeal to higher loyalties. Appealing to higher loyalties means that, yes, I did something that was deviant. Yes, I did something that was wrong. However, I did it for a higher cause. So when we talk about functionalism, functionalism is the first of the macro level perspectives. The two theorists that we're going to discuss here are Durkheim and Merton. I should mention to you that Durkheim actually said that deviant behavior, in any society is not only normal, but it is a good thing. It's a good thing that people deviate. Durkheim felt that when you put rules in place, people are going to violate them. That's human nature. You tell me I can't do something, well, the first thing I'm going to want to do is to do that. And Durkheim said that was actually a good thing because there are several things that come about, people breaking the rules, people deviating from the norms of society. First of all, social change comes from individuals who deviate from society. We'll talk more about that when we talk about positive deviance. The fact of the matter is, deviance can actually be a positive thing because social change comes about as a result. And also, deviant behavior promotes social unity, particularly if the behavior is abhorrent enough, aberrant enough, if it's bad enough. The fact of the matter is, deviant behavior does get us into a place of affirming our moral boundaries. I mean, we realize what we value, what we feel is right and what is wrong. And last but not least is deviant behavior, at least here in the United States, provides jobs for society. There are many people who are employed in the criminal justice system. And if crime and deviance were to go away, that would be a lot of people, millions of people literally, would be looking for work because there would no longer be a need for police officers or criminal court judges or criminal attorneys or probation officers or parole officers or correction officers. All of those jobs come about because people are breaking the law and being deviant. Now let's talk about Merton. Merton said that deviance and structural functionalism comes about because, well, because one of two things happens, or one of three things, I should say. Individuals are not able to achieve the socially accepted goals. Individuals are not willing to go through these socially accepted means to achieve those goals, or both. If we look at the socially accepted goals of our society, those goals include wealth and prosperity. That's what everybody's here for, right? Get rich or die trying. And the way we expect people to go about that are getting a job and getting an education. If you adhere to both of those, if you adhere to the goals of wealth and prosperity and the means that are socially acceptable about going to achieve them, you're engaging in conformity and you're not engaging in deviant behavior. There are four other ways that Merton felt individuals adapt. And in each of these four ways, you're going to find deviant behavior. Innovators want the money. They want the socially accepted goals. They want that wealth. They want the prosperity, but they're not willing to go through the socially accepted means to get it. When we talk about innovators, we're talking about people who may be involved in organized crime, people who may rob banks, things of that nature. Innovation is not always a bad thing. However, it's going against the socially accepted means. And therefore, you have individuals who are deviant simply because they're going against the means of society. Individuals who ritualize decide that they have given up. They've almost thrown up their hands in frustration. And they say that since they realize that there is very little chance that they are going to become wealthy and enjoy prosperity, they are still willing to get on the treadmill of life. And when I say the treadmill of life, that's exactly what I mean. They are jumping through the hoops, but they are going nowhere fast. And these people that ritualize are burned out perpetually, and they are likely to, and this is just an example here. They're likely to do stupid little things like showing up late, not caring about their job, or stealing office supplies. So not really big deviance, but deviance nonetheless. Individuals who retreat, they say, well, if I'm not going to be rich, I'm not going to jump through the hoops. I'm not getting on that treadmill of life. You're going to find these people on the fringes of society. These are people who are chronically unemployed, underemployed, engaging in substance abuse or alcoholism. Last but not least, you're going to see people who rebel. And the example that I give here, because these people um, want to replace the goals of society as well as the accepted means of achieving those goals. The example that I give here is the Joker in The Dark Knight. If you've ever seen that movie, he wants to take down the power structure of Gotham and descend it into uh, an abyss of chaos and anarchy. So, if there are any questions on that, please reach out to me. I know it may be difficult, but I will do my best to discuss that with you individually as I can if you have any questions. And finally, the other perspective, the conflict perspective, is the golden rule. And I recommend getting this book here, The Rich Get Richer and the Poor Get Prison. You can get a copy of this on Amazon for a few bucks, particularly an older edition. And you really don't need the newest edition to get the gist of what's going on. The golden rule, the conflict perspective, very simply says that deviance is the behaviors that are not the most harmful to society, but rather they are the behaviors that are the most harmful to the power and the wealth of the elite members of society. So if you think about it for a second, think about this in your mind. Who are you afraid of? Are you afraid of someone who's going to steal your purse? Are you afraid of someone who's going to steal your car? Or are you afraid of someone who's going to steal your Social Security? The fact of the matter is, when we look at the media, we see that the crimes that are being portrayed in the media are not the crimes that are causing the most harm to society. And I know some of you will go, well, there's a lot of violent crimes in the media. And you're right, there are a lot of violent crimes. However, there are also a lot of crimes that are not reported and are not even thought of as crimes, where individuals who are guilty of them would not even be charged criminally. So, for example, if someone goes up and shoots someone and kills them, that person is going to be charged with homicide. More than likely, that person is going to spend the rest of their life in jail, prison, I should say. However, if a CEO of a corporation dumps toxic chemicals in violation of EPA regulations and hundreds of people get sick, develop cancer, and die, that CEO is not going to be charged with a crime. More than likely, they're going to have to pay a fine, and that's about it. It's very unlikely that the white collar criminals are going to receive as harsh of sentences as the blue collar criminals do. And I know that some of my students have mentioned to me Bernie Madoff. And they said, well, Ed, Bernie Madoff got 150 years. And my response is, yeah, Bernie Madoff got 150 years. You know why? Because he was ripping off people that were richer than he was. If he'd been ripping us off, he probably would have gotten the medal to the city, the key to the city. Now, don't get me wrong. This is just one of the things I have against the criminal justice system, but I want you to understand what I'm talking about. The people that sent this country into a tailspin in 2008, the big executives of this country that caused the economic collapse 12 years ago, these people haven't spent one day in jail. You know what they got for doing it? They got bailout money. You know who paid those bailout money? Us, we, the taxpayers. And if you're not upset, you're not paying attention. Was that over the top? Sometimes I don't know. But I just wanted to mention to you, I mean that. If you're not upset, you're not paying attention. Why is cannabis illegal or struggling to be legal in all 50 states while tobacco is not? It couldn't have anything to do with the fact that the tobacco industry buys and sells the lawmakers, could it? Couldn't have anything to do with that. Same thing with prescription drugs. Same thing with alcohol. Couldn't have anything to do with that at all, could it? Think about it. Just think about it. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, ladies and gentlemen. Now, as I mentioned, there is this thing called positive deviance. Positive deviance is when individuals violate the norms of society, and in some instances actually violate the laws of society. And at the time, we look at it and we go, yeah, this was deviant. However, in retrospect, as we look back upon it, we see that it was actually the right thing to do. They may have been violating the norms of society and the laws, but these people were actually on the moral high ground. It was heroic for them to do what they did. The example that I give here is Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Gandhi. These people broke the law. This was not just the norms. These people broke the law to make a change for society. It was deviant, but it was the right thing to do. Remember what I said about Durkheim when he said that without deviance, there wouldn't be any social change? There you go. Positive deviance, my friends. Now, I want to talk about crime. Crime is a violation of a written law for which a penalty is prescribed. You're going to need to know that for your exam. Violation of a written law for which a penalty is prescribed. And I should point this out to you that there are majors in college dealing with criminology or the study of crime. There are entire courses that take an entire semester to deal with crime. So the fact of the matter is, crime is not something that's very easy to sum up, but I'm going to sum it up as quickly as I can in the next few seconds. Crime can be looked at as in a number of ways. It can be looked at as either felonies or misdemeanors, property or violent crime, white collar crime, computer crime, cyber crime, sex crimes, hate crimes. Any types of crimes that you can think of can be looked at in a number of different ways. So just be aware of that. Now, if we're talking about crime, we also need to talk about punishment. I mean, that's why we have punishment, is because people break the law, break the rules, and so we have to punish them. Well, I've got news for you. If you've ever been punished by your parents or the people that raise you, you see that the reasons for punishment that are listed here are the same reasons that we punish children and the same reasons that we punish adults who break the law. There are 4 reasons that we punish people. The first reason that we punish people is because they've done something bad and they deserve what they get. We call this retribution. Retribution is also referred to as lex talionis, or an eye for an eye. Somebody did something bad happens to them. Rehabilitation is also another reason that we punish people. This is particularly true when it comes to juveniles who have committed offenses. In the juvenile courts, their focus is supposed to be on rehabilitation. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get these juveniles or young offenders back on the right track. Or in some instances, I've actually known adults to receive punishment and receive rehabilitation as part of their punishment, such as counseling, vocational training. Drug treatment courts for adults is a big issue in rehabilitation of offenders, and it's actually very effective, by the way. Incapacitation is the third reason that we punish people. Basically, we are preventing them from victimizing society again, or we're doing the best we can. We're either locking them up, we're putting an ankle bracelet on them, possibly, depending on if you're charged with drinking and driving, they may install a lock. I can't think of the name of it right now. It's skipping me. I actually wrote a paper on it like 15 years ago. But it's the lock on your car that you have to blow into the ignition. And if you have any alcohol in your breath, it's not going to start the car. They're trying to incapacitate you. They're trying to keep you from reoffending. They're trying to keep you from victimizing society again. And last but not least is deterrence. Deterrence simply means that you are trying to scare somebody. Deterrence can be either general deterrence or specific deterrence, and we'll talk more about that on the next slide. General deterrence is geared towards making an example of people, making an example of offenders. When my ancestor, Blackbeard, Edward Teach, was killed in the 1700s, his head was chopped off, and they put his head on the mast of the ship as a warning to pirates. Basically, if we did this to Blackbeard, we'll do this to you. Martha Stewart, general deterrence, when she was sent to prison. Martha Stewart wasn't a threat to the society. They made an example of her. General deterrence. If we'll do this to Martha Stewart, we'll do this to you. Michael Fay. Michael Fay, for many of you that don't know the name, Michael Fay was a teenager. He was an American teenager over in Singapore in 1994, and he got caught vandalizing cars and throwing eggs at people's houses. And in Singapore, they don't play that. So they caned him. And what I mean when I say they caned him, I mean basically they pulled his britches down and they took a Singapore cane, which is a big stick of wood, and they proceeded to beat his backside bloody. Now, I know people sit there and look at me and go, well, Ed, that's brutal. Yes, it's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. However, Singapore doesn't have a lot of problems with vandalism. And I will guarantee you that not only was this general deterrence for people in Singapore, but this was also specific deterrence for Michael Fay, because I guarantee you that little punk hasn't egged another car in his life. I bet you that boy don't even eat eggs anymore. So Retribution, rehabilitation, incapacitation, and deterrence. And I should point out to you that a punishment does not need to hit all four of these for it to be employed. It only has to hit one. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the death penalty. Going back to deterrence, this man here, Caesar Beccaria, he was considered to be the father of criminology. He looked at deterrence as he looked at people as being rational actors. And they made the decision whether to offend, whether to be deviant, whether to commit crime based on a rational state of mind. They would calculate the risks. Okay. And he said, in order for something to be effective as a punishment, it has to be three things. It has to be swift, it has to be certain, and it has to be severe. It has to be all three: swift, certain, and severe. If it's not all three of these things, swift, certain, and severe, then it's not going to be effective as a punishment. And a lot of people argue that's why we see our criminal justice system as ineffective as a deterrent, particularly the death penalty. The death penalty is certainly not swift, and it's certainly not certain, and it's certainly not severe. But we'll talk more about that when we actually talk about the death penalty. The crime demographics I need you to be familiar with. This is just some things for your information. Crime is essentially a young person's game. You're looking at young people, and as it goes down, it goes down as you age. You don't see a lot of old people engaging in crime. I'm not saying that they don't, but I'm saying that as people get older, they tend to age out of crime. They tend to get married, they tend to find a career, they tend to go to school, or they tend to find something else to occupy their time. You don't see a lot of 70-year-old repeat offenders going in and robbing a bank. When it comes to race and crime demographics, I should mention that even though African Americans and white people are pretty much equal in terms of the prison population, I should mention that that is a disproportionate number of African Americans that are in these prisons. I should also mention that that is not because African Americans commit crime at a much higher rate than white people do. Rather, it is the fact that there is systematic injustice and systematic racism in our criminal justice system. If you're African American in this country, you are more likely to be stopped by police. You are more likely to be arrested. You are more likely to be charged. You are more likely to be found guilty or plead guilty. You're more likely to receive a sentence of prison. You're more likely to receive a longer sentence of prison, and you are more likely to receive the death penalty. We'll talk about that more when we talk about the death penalty. I will also mention that women traditionally have not been involved in the criminal justice system. However, in the last 30, 40 years since the war on drugs has taken place, we are incarcerating more people now, and we are seeing more women being incarcerated. I mean, for crying out loud, we're seeing grandmothers being incarcerated for life because of nonviolent drug offenses. That just makes absolutely no sense to me. And it also goes to show that there is systematic racism in our criminal justice system because the majority of these offenders are African American. Many people feel, many sociologists feel that the mandatory minimums and three-strike laws are part of the new Jim Crow in terms of incarcerating African Americans and disenfranchising African Americans with a felony conviction, depriving them of their right to vote. In fact, if you would like to watch the documentary 13, I recommend you do so because it's very eye-opening. And last but not least is class. And I will say this, it's not the fact that poor people commit more crimes than rich people. It's the fact that poor people and rich people commit different types of crimes. You're not going to see someone such as Bill Gates going in and robbing a 7-Eleven. Rather, you would see someone, and I'm not trying to besmirch Bill Gates, although after Microsoft Office 10, Windows 10, I kind of want to besmirch him. The idea is that you're not going to see him robbing the 7-Eleven because he has billions of dollars. People in that state of socioeconomic status are going to engage in white collar crimes, which, as I mentioned earlier, are going to be treated less harshly by the criminal justice system. Now, last but not least, capital punishment, the death penalty. There are a couple of things that I want you to be aware about capital punishment. First of all, capital punishment is not a deterrent. It's neither swift. Most people that are actually sentenced to die in this country spend a little over 16, 17 years on death row, if they're executed at all. It's not certain because there is a great deal of racial bias in who receives the death penalty. So just because you commit an offense does not mean you are going to be charged capitally, and it does not mean you are going to be found guilty, and it does not mean that you are going to receive a sentence of death, because there are a lot of factors that go involved in that. And it's also not really severe. There are some people who actually are more afraid of life without parole. I do know that, quite frankly, I would not want either one. Um, but the fact of the matter is, there are some people who are just not afraid to die. So, what can you really do to scare them? I would also like to point out at this point that we are the only westernized nation that has capital punishment. And as far as being a deterrent, it is not. Our homicide rates are through the roof compared to the rest of the world. They're through the roof. We have more people killed. In fact, in the 37 states, 30, I think it's 37 states that actually have the death penalty, there is a brutalization effect because the homicide rates in those states are higher than in states that do not have the death penalty. So you have to look at it that way. The racism that's involved, the money that's involved, because it costs, believe it or not. Some people go, well, I don't want my taxpayers' money to have somebody sit on their rear end for 50 or 60 years. Well, it's a lot cheaper, actually, believe it or not, and this is true, this is documented true, that it's actually cheaper to pay for someone to sit in prison for life than it is to actually sentence them to die, to execute them. There's also the opportunity of, unfortunately, executing someone who is factually innocent. And I've had somebody from the Department of Justice go, well, yeah, but we've only executed about 1% of the people that were falsely accused. Well, you may think that's a good thing, but it's not too good for the 1%. So if you haven't figured it out, I'm really just giving you the facts about the death penalty. I will say this, however, in support of the death penalty. If you going back here, if you believe in the death penalty simply for retribution's sake, I understand that. I get that. That is that's one of the reasons we punish people. It's there, and that makes sense. It's one of the four right there on the slide. It makes sense because capital punishment is about retribution, but it's not a deterrent. It certainly doesn't rehabilitate the offender. And as far as incapacitation, life without parole could do it better and cheaper. Guys, that's all I have right now. And I will see you online. If you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to me and let me know.